The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Chapter 2. I was summoned to the king. I remember hating this. The long walk up the endless throne room. At the front, I knelt on stone. Some kings chose to have rugs there for the knees of the messengers who had long news to tell. My father preferred not to. King Tyndareus' daughter is finally ready for marriage, he said. I knew the name. Tyndareus was king of Sparta and held huge tracts of the ripest southern lands, the kind of my father coveted. I had heard of his daughter too, rumored to be the fairest woman in our countries. Her mother, Leda, was said to have been ravished by Zeus, the king of the gods himself, disguised as a swan. 9 months later, her womb yielded two sets of twins, Clytemnestra and Castor, children of her mortal husband, Helen and Polytheseus, the shining signets of the god. But gods were known to be notoriously poor parents. It was expected that Tyndareus would offer patrimony to all. I did not respond to my father's news. Such things meant nothing to me. My father cleared his throat, loud in a silent chamber. We would do well to have her in our family. You will go and put yourself forth as a suitor. There was no one else in the hall, so my startled huff of breath was for his ears alone. But I knew better than to speak my discomfort. My father already knew all that I might say, that I was 9, unsightly, unpromising, uninterested. We left the next morning, our packs heavy with gifts and food for the journey. Soldiers escorted us in their finest armor. I don't remember much of the trip. It was overland, through countryside that left no impression. At the head of the column, my father dictated new orders to secretaries and messengers who rode off in every direction. I looked down at the leather reins, smoothed their nap with my thumb. I did not understand my place here. It was comprehensible, as so much of what my father did was. My donkey swayed and I swayed with him, glad for even this distraction. We were not the first suitors to arrive at the Tyndareus citadel. The stables were full of horses and mules, busy with servants. My father seemed displeased with the ceremony afforded us. I saw him rub a hand over the stone of the earth in our rooms, frowning. I had brought a toy from home, a horse whose legs could move. I lifted one hoof, then the other. Imagine that I had ridden him instead of the donkey. A soldier took pity on me and lent me his dice. I clattered them against the floor until they showed all sixes in one throw. Finally, a day came in which my father ordered me to bath and brushed. He had me change my tunic, then change again, and I obeyed. Though I was so no difference between the purple with gold or crimson with gold, neither hid my knobby knees. My father looked powerful and severe, his black beard slushing across his face. The gift that we were presenting to the Tyndareus stood ready, a beaten gold mixing bowl embossed with the story of Princess Danae. Zeus had wooed her in a shower of golden light, and she had borne him Perseus, Gorgon slayer, second only to Heracles among our heroes. My father handed it to me. Do not disgrace us, he said. I heard the great hall before I saw it, the sound of hundreds of voices banging against stone walls, the clatter of goblets and armor. The servants had thrown open the window to try to dampen the sound. They had hung tapestries, wealth indeed, on every wall. I had never seen so many men inside before. Not men, I corrected myself. Kings. We were called forward to council, seated on benches draped with cowhide. Servants faded backwards to the shadows. My father's finger dug into my collar, warning me not to fidget. There was violence in that room, with so many princes and heroes and kings competing for a single prize, but we knew how to ape civilization. One by one they introduced themselves, these young men showing off shining hair and neat waists and expensively dyed clothing. Many were the sons or grandsons of gods. All had a song or two or more written of their deeds. Tindarius greeted each in turn, accepted the gifts in a pile at the center of the room. I invited each to speak and present his suit. My father was the oldest among them, except for the man who, when his turn came, named himself Piliuc, Philoctetes, a comrade of Heracles. The man beside us whispered, with an awe I understood, Heracles was the greatest of our heroes, and Philoctetes had been the closest of his companions, the only one still living. His hair was gray and his thick fingers were all tendons, the dewy dexterity that marked an archer. And indeed, a moment later he held up the largest bow I had ever seen, polished yew wood with a lion's skin grip. The bow of Heracles. Philoctetes named it, gave it to me at his death. In our lands, a bow was mocked as the weapon of the cowards, but no one could say such a thing about this bow. The strength it would take to draw it humbled us all. The next man, the next man, his eyes painted like a woman's, spoke his name, Idomeneus, king of Crete. He was lean and his long hair fell to his waist. When he stood, he offered rare iron, a double-headed axe, the symbol of my people. His movements reminded me of the dancers that my mother liked. And then Meletius, son of Atreus, seated beside his hulking, bear-like brother Agamemnon. Menelaus' hair was a startling red, the color of fire forged bronze. His body was strong, stocky with muscles, vital. The gift he gave was a rich one, beautifully dyed cloth. Though the lady needs no adornment, he added, smiling. This was a pretty bit of speech. I wished I had something as clever to say. I was the only one here under 20 and I was not descended from a god. Perhaps Peleus' blonde-haired son would be equal to this, I thought, but his father had kept him at home. Man after man, and their names began to blur in my head. My attention wandered to these days, where I noticed for the first time the three veiled women seated at Tindarius' side. I stared at the white cloth over their faces, as if I might not be able to catch some glimpse of the woman behind it. My father wanted one of them for my wife. 3 sets of hands, prettily adorned with bracelets, lay quiet in their laps. One of the women was taller than the other 2. I thought I was a stray dark curl peeked from beneath the bottom of her veil. Helen is a light-haired. I remembered so that no one was not Helen. I had ceased to listen to the kings. Welcome, Meniotius. The speaking of my father's name startled me. Tindarius, it is my son who comes today to wed your daughter. There was a silence in which I knelt, dizzied by the spin of faces around me. Your son is not yet a man. Tindarius' voice seemed far away. I could detect nothing in it. He need not to be. I am a man enough for both of us. It was the sort of jest our people loved, bold and boasting, but no one laughed. I see, said Tindarius. The stone floor dug into my skin, yet I did not move. I was used to kneeling. I had never been glad of the practice in my father's throne room. Father spoke again. In the silence, others have brought bronze and wine, oil and wool. I bring gold, and it is the only a small portion of my stores. I was aware of my hands on a beautiful bowl, touching the story's figures. Zeus appearing from the streaming sunlight, the startled princess, their coupling. My daughter and I are grateful that you have brought us such a worthy gift, though paltry to you. A murmur from the kings. There was a humiliation here that my father did not seem to understand. My face flushed with it. I would make Helen the queen of my palace, for my wife, as you know well, is not fit to rule. My wealth exceeds all of these young men, and my deeds speak for themselves. I thought the suitor was your son. I looked up at the new voice, a man who had not spoken yet. He was the last in line, sitting at ease on the bench, his curly hair gleaming in the light of the fire. He had a jagged scar on one leg, a seam that stitched his dark brown flesh from heel to knee, wrapping around the muscles of the cuff and burying itself in the shadow beneath his tunic. It looked like it had been a knife, I thought, or something like it, ripping upwards and leaving behind feathered edges whose softness belied the violence that must have been caused it. My father was angry. Son of Laertes, I don't remember inviting you to speak. The man smiled. I was not invited. I am interrupted. But you need not fear for my interference. I have no vested interest in the matter. I speak only as an observer. A small movement from the dais drew my eye. One of the veiled figures had stirred. What does he mean? My father was frowning. If he is not here for Helen, then for what? Let him go back to his rocks and his goats. The man's eyebrows lifted, but he said nothing. Tyndareus was also mild. If your son to be a suitor, as you say, then let him present himself. Even I know it was my turn to speak. I am Patroclus, son of Menetius. My voice sounded high and scratchy with disuse. I am here as a suitor for Helen. My father is a king and the son of kings. I had no more to say. My father had not instructed me. He had not thought that Tyndareus would ask me to speak. I stood and carried the bowl from the pile of gifts, placed it where it would not topple. I turned and walked back to my bench. I had not disgraced myself for trembling or drooping, and my words had not been foolish. Still my face burned with shame. I knew how I must look to these men. Oblivious, the line of suitors moved on. The man kneeling now was huge, half again as tall as my father, and broad besides. Behind him, two servants braced an enormous shield. It seemed to stand with him as part of his suit, reaching from his heels to his crown. No ordinary man could have carried it, and it was no decoration. Scarred and hacked edges bore witness to the battle it had been. Ajax, son of Telamon. This giant named himself. His speech was blunt and short, claiming his lineage from Zeus and offering his mighty size as proof of his great-grandfather's continuing favor. His gift was a spear, supple wood, beautiful cat. The fire-forged point gleamed in the light of the torches. At last, it was the man with the scar's turn. Well, son of Laertes, Tyndareus shifted in his seat to face him. What does the disinterested observer have to say to these proceedings? The man leaned back. I would like to know how you are going to stop these losers from declaring war on you, or on Helen's lucky new husband. I see half a dozen men here ready to leap at each other's throats. You seemed amused. The man shrugged. I find the folly of men amusing. The son of Laertes scorned us. This was the large man, Ajax, his clenched fist as big as my head. Son of Telamon, never. Then what, Odysseus? Speak your mind for once. Tyndareus' voice was as sharp as I'd heard it. Odysseus shrugged again. This was a dangerous gamble. Despite the treasures and renown you have won, each of these men is worthy and knows it. They will not be so easily put off. All this you have said to me in private. My father stiffened beside me. Conspiracy, his was not only angry face in the hall. True, but now I offer you a solution. He held his hands empty. I have brought no gift and do not seek to woo Helen. I am a king, as has been said of rocks and goats. In turn for my solution, I seek for you the prize that I have already named. Give me your solution, or you should have it. Again, that slight movement from the dais. One woman's hand had twitched against her companion's dress. Then, here it is. I believe that we should let Helen choose. Odysseus posed to allow the rumors of disbelief. Women did not have a say in such things. No one may fault you then, but she must choose now at this very moment, so she will not be said to have taken counsel or instruction from you. And he held up a finger. Before she chooses, every man here must swear an oath to uphold Helen's choice and to defend her husband against all who would take her from him. I felt the unrest in the room. An oath? And over such an unconventional matter as a woman choosing her husband, the men were suspicious. Very well, Tyndareus, his face unreadable, turned to the veiled woman. Helen, do you accept this proposal? Her voice was low and lovely, carrying to every corner of the hall. I do. It was all she said. But I felt a shiver go through the men around me, even as a child felt it, and I marveled at the power of this woman, who, though veiled, could electrify a room. Her skin, we suddenly remembered, was rumored to be gilded, her eyes dark and shining as the sleek obsidian that we traded our olives for. At that moment she was worth all the prizes in the center of the hall, and more, she was worth our lives. Tyndareus nodded. Then I decree that it is so. All those who wish to swear will do so now. I heard muttering, a few angry, half-angry voices, but no man left. Helen's voice and the veil gently fluttered with her breath, held us all captive. As swiftly Simon priest led a white goat to the altar. Here it was a more propitious choice than a bull, whose throat must splash unwholesomely upon the stone floor. The animal died easily, and the man mixed its dark blood with the cypress ash from the fire. The bowl hissed loud in the silent room. You'll be the first, Tyndareus pointed out to the Odysseus. Even 9-year-olds saw how fitting this was. Already Odysseus had shown himself to cleaver by half. Our ragged alliances prevailed only when no man was allowed to be too much more powerful than the others. Around the room I saw smirks and satisfactions among the kings. He will not be allowed to escape his own news. Odysseus' mouth quirked in a half smile. Of course, it is my pleasure, but I guessed it was not so. During the sacrifice I had watched him lean back in the shadows, as if he would be forgotten. He rose now, moved to the altar. No, Helen. Odysseus posed, his arm half extended to the priests. Remember that I swear only in fellowship, not as a suitor. You would never forgive yourself if you were to choose me. His words were teasing and drew scattered laughter. We all knew it was not likely that one so luminous as Helen would choose the king of barren Ithaca. One by one the priests summoned us to the earth, marking our wrists with blood and ash, binding us chains. I chanted the words of the oath back to him, my arm lifted for all to see. When the last man had returned to his place, Tyndareus rose. Choose now, my daughter. Menelaus, She spoke without hesitation, startling us all. With expected suspense, indecision, I turned to the red-haired man, who stood, a huge grin cracking his face. In an outsized joy, he clapped his silent brother on the back. Everywhere else was anger, disappointment, even grief, but no man reached for his sword. The blood had dried thick on our wrists. So be it. Tindarius stood also. I am glad to welcome a second son of Atreus to my family. You should have my Helen, even as your worthy brother once acclaimed by Clytemnestra. He gestured to the tallest woman, as though she might stand. She did not move. Perhaps she had not heard. What about the third girl? They shout from a small man beside the giant Ajax. Your niece, can I have her? The man laughed, glad for an easing in the tension. You're too late, Toozer. Odysseus spoke over the noise. She's promised to me. I didn't have the chance to hear more. My father's hands seized my shoulder, pulling me angrily off the bench. We are finished here. We left that very night for home, and I climbed back on my donkey, thick with disappointment. I had not even been allowed to glimpse Helen's fabled face. My father would never mention the trip again, and once home the events twisted strangely in my memory. The blood and the oath, the room full of kings, they seemed distant and pale, like something a bard had spun rather than something I lived. Had I really knelt there before them? And what the oath I had sworn? It seemed absurd even to think of it, foolish and improbable, as a dream is by my dinner.